Asare. So, as has been introduced earlier by Mr. Amprofi Ajaman, we are going to hear a lot out of the presentation that is coming next from our brother, Mr. Dennis Asare. So the focus this time around, a lot of you were in the previous sessions that we've had, other climate change discussions that we've had in the past. This one is centered on women participation. That's where the focus really is. With a big round of applause, we invite for the presentation Mr. Dennis Asare, Senior Research Fellow. Imani. Then.
Good morning, everyone. Sami just promoted me. I'm Senior Research Associate, Senior Research Fellow, then senior members level. Thank you. Good morning once again, and thank you very much for coming. My colleague Amprofi touched on a few important things, and at some point in time, I thought I would just hand the pointer to him so he finished the presentation, because he touched on very important things that are captured in the work that we are doing with GCIC, particularly highlighting the issues of women, given that women play a key role in our economy. And so if the brown economy has not been able to deliver inclusive growth where women are able to prosper, then we should make every effort to ensure that as we transition into a green economy, women are able to prosper through climate change. And so the purpose of this conversation is to highlight the factors holding back women's effective participation in the green economy. Even though it is nascent in Ghana, if we are unable to identify the key things that are holding back women's role in the green economy, we won't be able to set out the policies that can address the inherent systemic and let's say institutionalized challenges that women face in the brown economy as well as in the green economy. And so what we seek to do is identify the pathways to increasing women's participation in the green economy by capturing the challenges of green business, female-led green businesses in Ghana. So in the presentation, I'll do a brief background on the context, linkages, climate change, women and green businesses, as well as look at the objectives of the paper that we have done, the approach that we adopted. One interesting thing that came out in the course of this research is that we all know that women play a key role in the brown economy, mainly in the informal sector. But it was interesting to find out that there are certain factors that are driving or pushing women into the green economy or into green businesses. And so we felt that it is very interesting to highlight all of those issues. What factors are actually driving women into the green economy? What is happening in there? What have women identified in the green economy or in green businesses that has made it an interesting area that women are pursuing? And so if you're able to remove all of those bottlenecks, then we can amplify or enhance their participation in them. Then we look at the challenges women encounter. And we look at this using two value chain examples to highlight the challenges women face within the green economy conclusion, and we make a few policy recommendations. So, as my colleague mentioned, climate change is affecting every facet of our social and economic life. And if you look around us, the evidences are glaring that if you look at the floods, the rising sea levels, the droughts that are going on within our agrarian communities, it tells you that the evidence or the effects of climate change is now visible for us to see. And in developing economies like Ghana, if you look at how the impact of climate change is combining perfectly, and it promises to threaten the very livelihood of a vulnerable population, it is imperative to now look at what are the alternative mechanisms that we can adopt to address climate change. If you look at the World Bank's Climate Change Development Report, one of the things they highlight is that in Ghana alone, if we don't address climate change, it could push about 1 million people into poverty. Already, a quarter of our population are poor, and 43.1% are multidimensionally poor, which means that they are deprived significantly in areas of education, food access, electricity, and other basic things like health. So already more than a third of our population are multidimensionally poor, and in some regions in Ghana, more than 2/3 of the population are multidimensionally poor. And so if you look at how, and climate change is going to amplify people's exposure to the things that drive them into poverty. And so one of the existential risks or crises that we face in our time is climate change. And given that if you look at our income levels in Ghana, it is generally low. But if we don't address climate change very well, incomes could fall by about 40%. And that is the risk climate change poses to our daily livelihoods. And I've mentioned how this affects Ghana even hugely. But the challenge is that this impact and threat of climate change is not evenly distributed. Some categories of our population are disproportionately affected. And the main category is women. Two reasons account for this. One is that women have relatively weak adaptive capacity because the very resources that enhances economic freedom, women are deprived from. For example, access to land, access to financing, creating a safe and a more competitive environment for women to effectively participate in our brown economy. Brown economy means the current economy that we have. So there are a lot of factors that combine to keep women away from making, or let's say, having access to more income, safer environment, and living or having very good standards of living. And so if you look at how climate change is able to worsen livelihoods, then those populations who already do not have very good standards of living are likely to be more affected. Another reason too is that women tend to work in more vulnerable sectors in Ghana. So if you take our Ghanaian economy now, there are about 43% of women who work in sales and services sector. And climate change affects the sales and service sector even much more greatly. The second thing is that more than half of the people in agricultural population, that is, if you take our agrarian communities, more than half of the population there are women. About a third of the agricultural population, or we call something agric holders or agricultural holders, these are people who take decisions when it comes to agricultural activities. About a third of them are women. And so you see that women are more represented in the sectors that are very much more vulnerable to climate change. And that is the main source of income for most women. If you look at the informal sector, what we call the non-establishment businesses in Ghana, there are about over 40% of them that are led by women. So it tells you that they are more populated, or they are more found in sectors that are vulnerable. And so if the effects of climate change is deepened, then these are the category of people who are likely to be more affected. Let me give you another scenario. In agrarian communities that are experiencing severe levels of drought, when climate change forces communities to migrate, the challenge is that men can have access to land. In patriarchal societies, when lands are in the hands of men and rules governing land are not gender equal, women will struggle to have access to productive resources like land. And so in that sense, climate change would affect the woman more than that. When climate change leads to drought and water scarcity, women and girls are responsible for finding water and firewood. And so they spend most of their time in the day looking for water and firewood. And so girls would have to drop out of school, and women cannot be fully engaged in economic activities. So climate change will cripple their economic freedom. Already the system is not creating enough room for them to play a key role in our economy. And so this is how climate change affects women. And so if you don't find key ways that we can adopt to ensure that the green economy we are transitioning into, the playing field is leveled, there are rules and there are policies that support women to scale some of the challenges that have already held them back in the brown economy, we will go through this period of green transition, and women will still feel a lot of inequalities, or there will still be more inequalities. There will be no gender parity, and women may not be able to prosper through climate change. And so it is very important that we pay attention to investment in women-led green businesses. And as the presentation goes, I'll touch on the reasons why we are seeing a lot more women going into the green sector. And so the overarching aim of what we are doing is that it is about time we highlight the challenges that women who are already in the green business space are facing. And if we make policies to address them, then we empower them to be stronger as we transition into the green economy, as well as support other female leaders and create more room that enhance their economic freedom and help them to prosper. And when research has also proven that when a woman prospers, their household also prosper. For example, if you look at the Ghana Poverty Profile Report, if you track between 2006 to 2017, women-led households were able to reduce poverty more than male-led households. So in 2017, we identified that in male-led households, more than a quarter of the population there, or more than 25% of people in male-led households were poor. But if you compare that to the female-led household, it was just about 17%. If you compare in the last decade, between 2010 and 2017, women-led households were able to reduce poverty by about 5%, but the male-led household, poverty declined by just 0.02%. So it tells you that if we enhance the economic freedom and economic power of women, we also contribute to transforming homes, giving more opportunity to girls and young people to have access to education and quality good health care. That is why these conversations are important in advancing women's prosperity and economic freedom. There are four key things that we wanted to get from this work that we did. Mainly identify the barriers to their effective participation and understand the cross-sectorial intractable challenges. So we realize that sometimes in an industry, the challenges may be same for everybody. But if you dig deeper across sectors, you realize that there may be certain underlying problems that influence most of the broader issues happening in the sector. So we pick some value chains to look at the intractable challenges across board. What are the differences? And we also realize that even the problems that happen in the green economy, it doesn't affect everybody the same way. The way some problems affect women is different from how it affects male-led businesses. And examine the readiness of our policy environment to create a supportive framework or supportive environment for women, then understand the potential entry point, because policy reforms happen at an intersection between power interest. And so we want to look at who within policy-making process now can support women policy-making and help them so that we get more of these issues into our policy space. Now, there are some guiding questions that we use during the analysis. One of them is that, what are the key barriers to women's participation in the green economy? We want to highlight on that, so we spend a lot of time digging deep to look at what are the main barriers, and we juxtapose that key framing question to look at in the brown economy and in the green economy. Do we have similar underlying problems? Then we look at what are the intractable sectorial issues. Is it different across sectors? Then is Ghana's climate policy and business environment open to support women? Or is it business as usual that they are also like any other SME? Then what are the available entry points? So these are the issues that guided the paper. This is the approach that we use. We call it the problem-driven political economy analysis, and it's something that we use a lot at Imani because we're able to combine a technical analysis as well as a policy analysis in one framework. So we look at the technically, what are the sectorial issues holding back women's participation or women's involvement in the green economy? Then we look at what are the structural, institutional, as well as individual negotiation between interest and power that influence policy reforms that are supportive for women businesses in Ghana. And so this is the approach. Then when we use this to filter information and do the analysis, we are able to identify what can be done by way of reforms to support women. So this is the approach that we use in the analysis. So it was interesting that when we were doing the analysis, we found out that there are certain factors driving women into green businesses, and that seemed to be, it's not a conversation that most people have. So we talk about women in green businesses or green business, green transition, but we don't really spend time to critically look at what is driving a lot of women into green businesses. And three things stand strong across the entire literature. That is increased female education. The fact that we've been able to improve women's access to education, we have equipped them with some basic skills that makes them employable in the green economy. And so access to education for women is not only good because education equips them with skill, but we equip women with future skills that makes them employable and help them to prosper through climate change. Then improve gender mainstreaming in climate financing. We see that currently both international and domestic financing arrangements or financing products tend to pay a bit more attention to gender equality issues. And that is creating a bit of space to help women scale the challenge of access to finance. The other third thing is that sustainable consumption, and this is the bit of interesting argument within the literature that women are more likely to purchase green stuff than men. Organizations with more women leaders are more likely to focus on climate change than organizations where their boards are dominated with men. Because the literature is arguing that perhaps psychologically, women tend to show more care and affection. And in terms of their domestic responsibilities in caregiving, responsible for household consumption, given the effect of climate change on livelihoods and how it affects people in terms of poverty issues, women on organization boards are more likely to push for conversations on climate change than male-dominated boards. The other thing too is, what also came up is human dignity. So this is how the human dignity has been analyzed in existing literature, that every day, most women spend a lot of their time on domestic activities like cooking and other things, and in rural and caregiving. In rural communities, women and girls are responsible for fetching firewood and water. That takes a lot of their time. It exposes them to risk. So the other thing that I was talking about human dignity is that women tend to do a lot of activities like fetching water, cooking, and other domestic work that exposes them to a lot of risk. But the other danger that we also even identified is that, a lot of Ghanaians still use biomass as the main cooking fuel. That is the use of firewood. And in the households where firewood is the main fuel for cooking and other things, women and girls are the population that are exposed to the risk of using biomass and all of that. And so because of human dignity, because they are exposed to a lot of health risk when they use firewood, or they are exposed to fossil-based fuels, they are now seeking for alternative fuels that protect their well-being. And that is why some women are pursuing things like cook stove or LPG, or things that reduces their exposure to health risk. And so that is the bit of human dignity and conversations around even women's right, that they have. It's a fundamental right to have access to clean cooking fuel and all of that. All of those conversations have come together in discussing women's dignity within climate change. And these three key issues are driving women to pursue more greener stuff. But what is interesting is that globally, companies that are doing a lot more green tend to have more women on their decision-making panel. So if we support women to get more into the green space and get into the higher senior ranks and decision-making level, we are more likely to see more climate expenditure or climate spending than what we have now. And the World Bank has projected that at least we could see about a 10% or 20% increase in climate spending if we have more women in leadership roles. And this is the power of women. Please, women, clap for yourself. This is the power of women in this whole climate action. So they are not just any population, but women are impactful population in this climate action. So let's take them one after the other. So if you look at Ghana, and in terms of increased female education, you see currently there's been a bit of emphasis on STEM education as well. But we try to track a bit of gender parity in terms of education over the last 10 years. And as of 2010, you could see that there was a huge gender parity gap at the pre-tertiary level. And pre-tertiary means that we look at before the higher education, that's before university. You could see there was a lot more men in school than even in, there are a lot more men in school than females, and that shows the gap. And it was across board. You could see that even at the tertiary level, so the tertiary level is the blue line, and the pre-tertiary is this light blue, right? It's a light blue, and you could see the gap. So whilst we were achieving a bit of gender parity at the pre-tertiary level through FQ, that is free compulsory basic education, it was not transitioning or contributing to pushing more women into higher education. So what this data shows is that this is the tertiary level. The gender parity index, it compares the ratio of men to women within a particular level of education. And the standard is to hit above 0.95. Going beyond 0.95 means that averagely, if you have a classroom, there's always at least one boy, one girl in the classroom. And the lower you go, it means that there are more boys in the class than women. If you look at this 0.6, what this 0.61 means that in every class of 100, there will be 60 boys and 40 girls. In every class of 100 students, there will be 60 boys and 40 girls. But if you look at something like 0.96, it means that you are almost having the same number of boys and girls in the same class. So at the pre-tertiary level, we had made significant improvement through the free compulsory universal basic education to get more women going to school. But this was not translating into getting more women into higher education. But over time, we've seen significant improvement in that. So you see that now at the tertiary level, the ratio of female to male is almost at par. And if you look at the gender parity gap across the two levels of education, you can see a very wide gap between the number of women in tertiary education as at the early part of the last decade compared to the pre-tertiary level. And you could see that now the gap is almost closing. And by the time we reach 2030, we are likely to see this line closed up. And that gender parity index in the tertiary level will almost be 1. Or even 1.04, which means that equal participation. And even the 1.01 shows that there are some schools that there are more girls than boys. And so because we are increasing more women in education, the thing is, they are acquiring basic skills that makes them employable in the green economy. For example, our emphasis on science, technology, engineering, and mathematics are the critical or the basic skills one needs to play a bit of a key role within the green economy. And so because they go to school, they learn a bit of science, maths, engineering, they acquire the fundamental skills that they need so that when the green economy opens up or when they want to find jobs within the green space, they have a bit of the basic skill. In schools that even emphasize on more STEM, they are equipping the women to have skills that help them to work at the higher level of the green economy. For example, the higher STEM technical jobs that are available. When women are able to go through STEM education, they equip that skill that helps them to be able to work more even at the higher level of the chain where incomes are higher. And so we are equipping women with the skills that will help them to be able to play a role in the green economy. For example, they learn math skills, accounting skills, management skills, and so they're able to bring all of that into their green businesses. Some learn agriculture, some are exposed to maybe technology, and they're able to bring all of those skills into the green economy. But if the education gender parity index was very low and there were very fewer women in school, that means that the basic skills that they need to be employable, they wouldn't have that. And so they will stay in the low-level employment areas where there's low income and there's little social mobility. And so society, our economy will be growing, we'll be recording double-digit GDP growth and even hitting 1 trillion cedis of GDP, but it won't be translating into making women better. And so that is why giving women access to education is so important. But it shouldn't end there. If you don't get more women into STEM, what will happen is that they will get into the green economy, but they may never be able to get into the higher levels of jobs that gives higher income and also helps with, or that gives them the power to influence decision making. So we took a bit of a sample of data, and you know in the green economy, the renewable energy appears to be the most dominant green business. So we took that data. Now, the analysis as of 2019 shows that across the entire renewable energy workforce, there are only about a third of them that are female. The female workforce in the renewable energy sector is about 32%. If you dig deeper and break it down, you see that majority of them are doing administration work. Majority of them are in the administration area. A few of them are doing STEM, and a greater proportion of them are doing non-STEM related technical work. So what this means is that we are giving them the skills to be able to play a role in the green economy. But if we don't encourage them and push more women into STEM, when they get into the green economy, sometimes they are unable to do the higher level technical work that are related to STEM, and so they stay within relatively lower levels of employment, that is around administration and non-technical work. And the higher incomes are also around this area when the jobs they do are related to the STEM and technical work. And this red dotted line shows that within the whole industry, this is the representation of women. But if you do a breakdown, most men are going into this area than into administration and non-STEM technical. And that is what we don't want to see. Because already in the informal sector, or within even our formal sector, most women are in the lower level of employment, doing a lot of administration stuff, and incomes are low, and with relatively little social mobility. If you take most of the boards within Ghana, or top organizations, very few of them have female leaders on their board. And so that means that we should get women into education, but we should make the point to push them into STEM, because one of the defining skills within the green economy is your STEM skills. Then we look at solar PV. Within the green economy, the area that employs a bit more women, that is within the renewable energy sector of the green business, it is solar PV that employs a lot more women compared to wind and other technologies. Even within the solar PV sector, you see that most women represent about 40% of the population in the solar PV sector. Most women are doing administration, non-STEM technical, and other technical, but the STEM technical one is a bit lacking. And so we are increasing women access to education, particularly even at the higher education level, that's the tertiary education level, but we should emphasize more on STEM. Because in the green economy, the more you have STEM skills, the higher your employability, the more you're able to also run successful green businesses in the green economy. And another factor too that is driving a lot more women is the increasing gender mainstreaming in climate financing. So currently, if you look at most of the climate funds that we have globally, there are specific rules on gender mainstreaming, making sure that a portion of that supports women, either as direct beneficiaries or end beneficiaries. Hitherto, it wasn't that. There were not specific guidelines that ensures that projects that are sponsored with climate funds ensure gender mainstreaming. But currently, we are seeing a bit more improvement in gender mainstreaming of climate financing. If you look around us locally, you see currently there are some banks that are developing products and services mainly for women SMEs. And that is a bit of improvement, given that banks are now creating products and services only to support women. In our space, we categorize green businesses as part of SMEs, and so they also tend to qualify for these products and services. That is increasing women's access to financing, which was a major barrier to their participation in the brown economy we have now. One of the difficulties women have is accessing finance, because in Ghana, collateral influences credit success. But women don't have secured access to land, which is one of the highest collaterals, and so they can't access finance. But with the increasing gender mainstreaming in climate financing, we are creating a pool of financing that women can access without the collateral hurdles. And financial institutions are also minimizing some of the conditions that women must meet before they can access financing. This is empowering women to get into the green space. And so when they come into green businesses, either doing cook stove, climate smart agriculture, either they are doing coffee, or they go into solar PV, there are a bit of financial products that they can access, and climate finance project that is in a country that they can also access. So this is also helping them to scale the access to finance challenges. So we try to look around. If you look at the OECD's data, official development assistance that came for climate financing, you see that year on year, you see the total amount of money that integrated gender equality as a core criteria is increasing over time. And so over the last, let me say, 5 years, that's between 2014 and 2019, you see that the amount of money focusing more on gender equality has increased more than even the actual climate financing projects that are general climate financing. And so most of these funds are paying more attention to gender equality. We also look at blended finance. That is, in the climate financing space, we don't only have what do you call we have something called blended finance, where you can have a public climate finance source combined with private sector, or combine other multiple sources of financing to support a climate-related project. And so we are seeing that blended finance for gender and climate change is also increasing very significantly. And in the last 10 years, the blended finance mainly to support gender and climate change has increased from 1.7 billion to 6.2 billion US dollars. So across the world, if you look at the blended finance, that is financing for climate change that have been commingled or combined into one, about 6.2 billion of them as of 2020 were mainly for gender and climate change issues. And if you look at the transactions of blended finance, mainly targeting gender and climate change, it's increased significantly from about 22 in 2010 to about 60. So we are seeing more transactions raising money to support gender and climate change. And the greatest sponsors of that are impact investors. So impact investors are the main people driving financing or blended financing for gender and climate change. And most of the money that came for gender and climate change came to sub-Saharan Africa. Most of the money came to sub-Saharan Africa. And so it tells you that gradually we are seeing a bit more improvement in the availability of financing for women in green businesses or within the climate financing space, even though it is still inadequate, because the amount of money that women need to support adaptation are still woefully inadequate. In countries like Ghana, where over 90% of our climate finance goes into mitigation, there's very little left to support adaptation. And so still, women need more financing to help them adapt or to lead green businesses. Now, on the sustainable consumption and human dignity, this is the existing literature argument. That is this research that has proven and shown that women leaders, business leaders, are more likely to prioritize climate change than male business leaders. And companies that have more women representation are more likely to highlight issues on gender and climate change. Another thing is that when there is more competition, stiffer competition in the business space, is gradually reducing the extent to which female leaders can push for climate change. And so that is one of the factors that is being established in the literature, that as business competition is coming so strong, the pressure to prioritize shareholders' interest over the environmental interest or ESG issues may likely push women to reduce a bit of their priority on climate change. However, largely, women business leaders are more likely to go in for greener stuff or consume green products than the men. Another thing that was identified in the literature is that existing cultural biases, if they are deepened, can reduce women's ability to also push for more greener stuff. Because if the cultural biases exist, they can't have access to education, they can't have access to financing, and so they won't be able to rise to the top of decision making where they can prioritize issues about gender and climate change. And so these are the other factor, that is the sustainable consumption. And I spoke about the human dignity part, where women are seeking greener solutions that first protect their own well-being, because it's a basic right that women must have. And so these three factors currently are combining perfectly to push more women into green solutions or into green businesses. That is improved access to education, including STEM, increased access to gender mainstreaming, and the gender differences in sustainable consumption and human dignity. These factors are really combining very well, and they vary in different countries. Countries that have very few women in education are less likely to see more women leading businesses in climate change. Countries that still have deeper barriers to women participation are less likely to see their women pushing into the green space, just as the issues are combining there. And this may change. Other factors may come up that will even push more women into the green business space than we have now. So we come to one of the central issues of our conversation. And the issues are broad, and we've been able to narrow all of them into these 4 blocks of challenges that women in green business face. And we will pick them one after the other, then we get to the conclusion. So one of the key issues that came out in our engagement with the female-led green businesses is that, and I was shocked, if you speak to the men, financing, chief, the money no day. If there is money, we can push more, we can expand, and the men can give you business plan by just talking to you. But when we spoke to the women, the first thing that comes from most of the women is the social and traditional perception of gender roles. The cultural biases and traditional norms that hold back women's participation in the brown economy are reflecting in the green economy as well. So there is this perception of roles that women should play and roles that men should play. And women face severe gender inequality in that space. And there are certain green businesses coming now that we found evidences of male competitors telling the woman that this is not a woman's job. This job is meant for men. And it cuts across their value chains. And it's not just maybe a one-off thing at the sales point, but runs through all the value chains. And for example, when we spoke, and the two value chains we use are the cook stove and climate smart agriculture. In the cook stove value chain, it starts with the clay digging, the molding, using the potter's wheel, then the firing, as well as doing the fabrication of the metal case and all of that. At the clay end, in some communities, that is job for women. Digging the clay, making it wet with water, and bringing it to the men. And so the women have been reduced to the lower end of the chain because traditionally, the communities have believed that pottery making is not a woman's job. And digging clay doesn't give a lot of income. The income happens at the fabrication as well as the making of the cooking stove level. And so if we exclude them from entering the higher levels of the chain, it means they can't make more income and they'll be left at the end of the chain where incomes are low. Then when you come to the pottery making of the clay pot in the cooking stove, there is also the perception that this is a man's job. Women don't do this. And so women are struggling to also play a role within even the pottery making. So they can't have access to even the potter's wheel that they will use to mold the clay pot. Again, if you come to the fabrication of the metal case, one of the gender inequalities is that because we have relatively fewer women in TVET, that is the technical and vocational training institutions, we are getting fewer women going into welding and fabrication. And so most of the fabrication jobs are done by men. And that has created over time some perception that this is a man's job. And so in factories that had women, the women were struggling. And let me give you this example. There was one of the green business entrepreneurs we spoke to who said at the fabrication stage where she brought in some 3 women, the men knows that the women have other responsibility like care, responsibility home, so they close around 6. The men will push a lot of the workload to the night so that the woman will leave. By so doing, they reduce the income of the woman. Because psychologically or socially, they think it is a man's job. And they approach them to tell them, why are you coming to do a man's job? And they say in the local language, are you also a Obejuma? So like pottery making, is it a woman's job? And some of these words tend to get deeper in the woman's minds, and what we identify is called self-stereotyping. So gradually, some of the women are getting to accept the fact that these levels of the value chain are meant for men. And that is the bit of inequality that they face within some of the value chains. There are also instances where, because the women have not been exposed to TVET education, especially in fabrication and welding, their speed and their output may be lower compared to the men. So some male-led businesses are more likely to employ the men than the women. And also sometimes the men also feel like the women are dragging them. And so companies that don't have strict policies to ensure gender parity are more likely to go in for men than women. And all of this, the underlying reason are the social and gender dimension of our roles. And persuasive assumptions about women's capacity that, oh, this one, it requires more strength. Women don't have strength. Women don't have this, and so they can't do this job. So don't bring in women. You see, when you brought in a woman, our production is even going down. And they're able to align the dots to make it look like it's true, but it's a lie. They make it look like it's true. And it is getting into the heads of male business leaders. Another thing is a bit of gender-based violence that we also identify that some of the women are threatening to leave the space. For example, the cook stove industry, one of the biggest manufacturers of cook stove in Ghana and even in Africa. There are about 8 main producers. She's the only female. The men in the industry walk to her and tell her, this is our territory. We won't let you survive here. To the point that where they source raw materials like the roofing sheet to make the metal case, they have told the factory not to sell to the woman. And so she struggled to get access to resources just because people think this is a man's job So don't come into this space. And that is how our traditional perceptions of gender roles get so much deeper into this, determining division of labor and assignment of roles in our economy. And so if we keep women at the lower end of the chain, what happens is that they have low income. Low income leads to low education. Low education leads to low access to quality life. And that means that they can never get to the higher levels of living that they can prosper through climate change. And so one of the biggest challenges for women in the space is really not about financing. Financing is not the first thing, but the perception of gender roles, that we accept that what a man can do in this green business space, a woman is capable of doing that. And the evidence shows that gradually more women are coming into it. At least in solar PV, 40% of the women in the workforce of the people in the workforce are women. It shows that with more opportunities and support, we could get a lot more women into the green business space. The other issue is limited access to financing. And as I already mentioned, there are more financing going in there, but it is still not enough. And so some women struggle to get access to finance. And that is also rooted in the challenge here. Difficulties distinguishing between green business and regular SMEs. So some of the banks assume that green businesses are also like any other SME. But what they forget is that for green business innovation to even thrive over time, most of them in Ghana are at the development stage where they have found the innovation, they keep working on it and reaching out to a relatively smaller number of customers. They don't have a very huge customer base, and so the cash flow is a bit limited. And for that matter, we can't give them the same conditions as we give to someone who is importing something to sell in the market, because the customer target of green businesses is not the entire population. Very relatively few people patronize green stuff. Even in public institutions, relatively few of them pursue green stuff. And so they don't have very huge cash flows as you expect from other businesses. And treating them as one, putting all of them in one bracket makes it difficult for them to get finance, because there will always be a bit of challenge somewhere. Then weak communication. We also found that most women also are not aware of the climate finance product and resources that come into the country. For example, projects from international communities that is meant to support climate change, that's supporting private sector in climate change. Most of the women were not aware of it. And that is because of the weak communication of most of the funds available. For example, we have the Green Climate Fund. There is the Global Environment Fund as well. We also have the Scaling Up for Renewable Energy Program and other climate funds that are coming into the country that most of the women in the space are not aware. And they are not aware not because they don't know the funds, but they don't know the eligibility criteria or where or who to access these funding. And that is also holding them back from accessing some of these internationally available funds. And the limited understanding of the green business industry by the financial institutions, as I've already mentioned. Then general lack of support for green business in the country. Now, currently, we don't specifically have a framework that, or a national or a policy framework that is mainly driving green business in the country. We have boxed all of that into our climate action. And so we believe that everything that government is doing about our climate action should one way or the other accelerate green businesses, but it doesn't work like that. They need a stable and predictable business environment and also enhanced patronage of green products in order for them to thrive. Plus, they also face all of these macroeconomic challenges, and so when that combined with the peculiar challenges in the space, then it makes it even much more difficult for them to work in the green business environment. So our lack of clear policy to promote women in green business is also a big challenge for women, and they have to compete a lot. There's no special product available. Even in the banks, they don't have a lot of that. They have general product, but maybe something that they may give priority because of the sustainable banking principles now that enjoins them to prioritize environmental and social impact projects. And so if a woman is leading on green business, the assumption is that then the banks, because of the sustainable banking principles, they should favor, or they are more likely to look at the female-led green business. Apart from that, we don't really have a clear public policy that is designed mainly to push women in green businesses. And the last one is low awareness and lack of information about the opportunities in the green space. So if you speak to some of the leading female business in the green space, they have deep information about what is happening in the space, but it is not across the board. Most women still don't understand the opportunities available for them in the space. And so they don't even know, when they are involved in climate smart agriculture, they don't know what to do in the value chain, even though they are in the green business space. So they don't know the tools, the practices, and the mechanisms that they can enhance their productivity within the green space. And so we shouldn't, one of the things is that the awareness is too low. And that if we're able to amplify more of the opportunities in the green economy space for women, we would be able to get more women into the green business space and leadership and amplify their role within the green economy space. And one other thing too is the low participation of women in STEM programs. Currently in Ghana, we have just about 27% of higher education, that's university level education. Only 27% of the population of women in there are doing STEM related courses. Most of them are not doing courses that are related to STEM, and so the ability to also lead and work within the green economy is a bit curtailed. Even when it comes to engineering, it drops to as far low as about 17%. Across the world, we have only about 35% of higher education women doing STEM related. And it was fascinating to see that even countries like Switzerland are also struggling like Ghana in terms of getting more women into science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. All of that are also factors that combine to affect women. And I've talked about the understanding of the green business sector, then low communication and advertisement on green business opportunities. Mostly you hear about some opportunities in the brown economy, but when it comes to the green economy, it's like there's not a direct concerted effort to highlight these opportunities and sell it out to most of our women in the green space. And so all of these are the dominant 4 factors. There are other issues that come up that what we realize is that if you speak to about 10 of them, 8 of them will highlight these 4 strong points as the main challenges. But in the conversation here, I'm sure we'll delve deeper and some other things will come up and we will add to the challenges. So what do we say? We accept that the green economy presents a lot of opportunities. But if we don't address the pre-existing challenges that held back women from prospering in the brown economy, some of these challenges are moving straight into the green economy, like gender roles, access to financing. There are problems already in the brown economy, and they found themselves again in the green economy because they are systemic problems. If you don't address them, they will hold women back, irrespective of the economy that the role they play there. And furthermore, improved attention to gender mainstreaming is crucial. If we focus more on ensuring that projects and funds are pursue gender equality, not as one of the factors, but as a core condition, then we increase women's ability to access financing and help them to scale some of the challenges that they face. One interesting thing too is that if we give women control of income and key productive assets such as land, it has the potential to catalyze their participation in the green economy and even incentivize them to shift towards sustainable consumption. Women that have more income can start pursuing using LPG. But if they don't have income, then they'll have to now live with the firewood. If their income improves, they can now pursue cook stove. Gradually in the community, women can now start pursuing even solar PV or solar-based SME activities in their local community. So helping women to increase their income is very critical to their economic freedom. And that in spite of all the efforts to address gender inequalities, women are still underrepresented in the green space, and we need to do more. And women continue to face a lot of inequalities in spite of all that we are doing. Therefore, we need deliberate policy actions that will address the systemic problems so that we create a level playing field for our women. And so some of the 5-point recommendation that we make is that it's about time we develop a gender policy when it comes to supporting women in our climate action. We have broader policies that talks about gender mainstreaming and other things, but we don't have a clear policy guideline on promoting women within the climate action. And it's about time we have something like that. Yes, our national climate policy, the NDCs, and other programs that we have are looking at gender issues in different ways, but we need to synchronize all of that into a specific policy with clear outcome guidelines that can even support some of these ministries and departments to pursue gender equality issues. Then we need to increase women access, not just to education, but to STEM education, because if you look at the green business space, what is happening is that every year, the job creation in that space is growing by about 10% every year. But if you look at the extent to which women participation is growing by just about 5%. So it means that if 100 jobs are created in the green economy, only 50 is occupied by women. And so we must increase their access to STEM education so that when they have these skills, they can lead businesses as well as work in the space. We will still continue. Then the final thing that we are going to look at is we must ensure that we create a system where financial institutions get to understand the green business space. Once they understand it, they can develop specific tools and products that help them. It's good we have Development Bank of Ghana here. As part of their climate action, they may consider creating a product focused on gender, just to push women more into the climate action, and get government to develop or implement a gender equality principle that in the departments and ministries and agencies, can we have a gender equality principle that guides their disbursement of funds? For example, the National Entrepreneurship and Innovation Program is becoming one of the main agencies pushing private sector, especially in the green area. Can we have a gender equality principle that says that for all the disbursement that we make, at least 40% should go to women businesses in the green space? Because that is what globally some of the bigger countries or like developed countries are doing. Like if you take the OECD and the EU area, they are developing clear gender equality rules. And so when projects come, they are able to calculate and look at to what extent does this make the gender mainstreaming rule. If it doesn't cut it, then you have to revise the project. And that would ensure that most of these disbursement and funds that support SMEs go to support women. And let's increase the awareness on green businesses so that more women will get to understand that the green economy is going to create a level playing ground where women can compete at par with men. But we must equip them with the skills and the financing so that they can actively participate in that economy. So I will end here and hand over the mic to Sami. Thank you very much.